Have you ever told someone exactly what happened to you, named a real deep pain, only to have them instantly slap their own label on it? You say, "I'm hurt," and they shoot back, "Oh, you're just overreacting." You say, "I'm afraid," and they tell you, "You're being dramatic." It's an incredibly isolating feeling, isn't it?
Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. For all you focused learners out there, today we're unpacking a really fascinating philosophical and theological framework by author Ryan MacLean. We're going to look at a deeply universal human problem that he calls failed reception. It's this profound look into human communication, suffering, and what actually happens when our testimony is replaced before it even arrives.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover the wound of failed reception, bearing the repair burden, why this is a universal human problem, procedural non-reception and Pilate, surviving the collapse of meaning, and finally, putting the person before the frame.
All right. Section 1, the wound of failed reception beyond misunderstanding. Let's dive right into what happens when communication breaks down on a structural level. Because listen, this isn't just about a simple misunderstanding.
MacLean uses this absolutely brilliant analogy here. Imagine you send a text that says, "Please bring me chocolate ice cream," and the person shows up with broccoli because they decided you probably meant something healthy. I mean, that's betrayal. You transmitted a very real feeling, like, "I'm sad," but the listener receives this smaller, distorted, broccoli version of your message, like, "She wants attention."
What's really interesting here is how the core problem is defined. Failed reception isn't about someone disagreeing with you after hearing you out. Actually, it is the violence of displacing your actual testimony before it even lands. The listener just substitutes their own projection, maybe a clinical diagnosis or a prior expectation. So the actual you completely disappears behind a frame they've already built.
Section 2, bearing the repair burden, the homework of pain. Let's see how this builds, because the fallout from this failure to receive your message is just absolutely exhausting.
This sequence perfectly illustrates what MacLean calls the repair burden. Imagine you drop a glass and cut your hand. You say, "Ouch, I'm bleeding," and someone responds with, "Are you sure? Maybe you just want attention." Now you don't just have a bleeding hand, you have this secondary part-time job of doing homework while bleeding just to prove that your blood is in fact blood. The person who failed to receive your message has just transferred the entire burden of repairing the communication straight onto you.
Moving on to Section 3, a universal human problem, from families to AI. Because the crucial point here is that this isn't just some rare glitch between friends. It happens literally everywhere.
This exact structure repeats across our entire society. A kid says, "I'm scared," and is instantly dismissed as being dramatic. A patient goes to a hospital in serious pain, but their lived testimony is just processed right through a doctor's diagnostic bias or time pressure. Over in the courts, a lived, messy reality is flattened into a sterile case file. Even with AI, you might share a really complex thought full of grief or nuance, and the AI just spits back a generic safety policy trigger.
Okay, so to explain why this breaks down so badly, the text introduces a formal communication loop called Catholic Invariant Grammar, or CIG, basically meaning only survives if it passes through this specific chain. The source transmits it, but the receiver must faithfully admit it as itself. They then participate in it, preserve it with fidelity, and carry it forward into continuity. If reception fails at any point, boom, this entire chain breaks and identity completely collapses.
There's a pretty funny but really sharp analogy used here to explain this. If you hand someone a cookie and they look at it, call it a hockey puck, stick it in the garage, and then actually get mad at you because their hockey puck is melting chocolate chips, that's failed reception. Suddenly you have to do all this work to explain what a cookie is. The lesson is simple. Stop categorizing people. As MacLean writes to his daughter, boxes are for shoes and cereal, not people.
Section 4, procedural non-reception and Pilate. Now we're going to escalate into the theological center of this theory, looking at the ultimate historical case study of failed reception. In the Christian tradition, Christ comes into the world as the Word, the truth, and the light. He is transmitting perfect truth, teaching right there in the temple. But instead of being received as the Messiah, he's received by the authorities completely through their own frames, as a political threat, a criminal, a category violation, a blasphemer.
And this brings us right to Pontius Pilate, who MacLean analyzes as the ultimate archetype for what he calls procedural non-reception. Pilate has truth literally standing right in front of him, yet he asks, what is truth?
The author compares this to holding a carton of milk in front of an open fridge and yelling, "Where is the milk?" Pilate represents a system that officially processes, manages, and documents truth without ever making the relational room to actually receive it.
The Passion narrative is essentially a concentration of multiple forms of failed reception happening all at once. Christ's true identity is replaced with manageable institutional categories. His love is treated as a danger, his truth as blasphemy. The authorities maintain all their procedural purity while completely failing to receive the actual person standing right before them. The witness is completely overwritten by the system.
Section 5. Surviving the collapse of meaning. So we've seen the damage this causes, from everyday family arguments to massive historical tragedies. The big question is, how does meaning survive when reception entirely collapses?
To prove how far this theory goes, MacLean stress tests it using highly polarizing historical figures like Osama bin Laden in the paper's appendix. Now, to be incredibly clear, the author is not excusing or endorsing any actions here. Rather, he is impartially demonstrating a principle, practicing biography rather than judgment. Understanding the complex trajectory of a human life, the family, the culture, the exact realities of their formation, has to come before we apply our historical judgments. It's the ultimate, neutral boundary of encountering the human before the frame.
Returning to the theological scale, MacLean reveals how the resurrection acts as the ultimate continuity beyond failed reception. Think about it. When Christ is resurrected, he still has his wounds. The wounds aren't just erased like some mistake. They are transfigured into profound sites of recognition. Thomas literally recognizes him through the wounds. This proves that failed reception does not get the final word. The witness actually survives.
Section 6. The person before the frame. Which brings us to the practical solution for that heavy repair burden we all carry around.
The opposite of failed reception isn't just mindlessly agreeing with everyone, right? Like, if someone says the moon is made of cheese, you don't have to agree. MacLean calls the actual solution faithful reception. It is the disciplined, really generous act of letting a person's testimony arrive completely intact before you convert it into a classification or a correction.
If we want to practice true justice and charity, we really have to follow this order of operations. Witness before classification, presence before correction. Think of Jesus walking with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. He walks with them and truly listens to their grief before he ever corrects their understanding. Human connection and presence absolutely must happen before institutional procedure or intellectual correction.
Which leaves us with this powerful core anchor mantra, person before the frame. The deepest act of love isn't always agreeing with someone. The deepest act of love is receiving the person first before applying any labels. You just let them arrive. You open the door and truly see who is standing there before you hand them a diagnosis or an assumption.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought to carry out into the real world today. Look, we all use frames and we all use boxes. It's literally just how human brains work. But who will you make the active effort to receive today in their full truth before you frame them? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning out there.